Potential Not Pathology, embracing creative and resourceful approaches to psychotherapy with author and therapist Dr. Paul J. Leslie.
Welcome to Potential Not Pathology, where we offer information and inspiration for mental health therapists who are interested in learning and applying unique therapeutic techniques and concepts into their work. With a focus on the potential each client brings to his or her therapy session, this program examines ideas and tools which can assist your clients on their journey toward healing. I'm Paul J. Leslie. I'm grateful that you're here. I'm excited today. I get to do an interview with a very dear friend of mine, but before I get to that, I want to give a heartfelt thank you to everyone who's been listening to these podcasts. I see a lot of the downloads from literally all over the world, and the numbers keep growing and growing. A lot of people tuning into the message that we're trying to get out, that put more focus on the potential people bring into therapy, the better the treatment outcomes a lot of times. And that's really helps me when I see that people are responding in such a positive way. The emails and the calls and all those are just wonderful, and I appreciate them immensely. Thank you, and I appreciate you hanging there with me as we go through new technology adjustments and also kind of finding our own voice in this rather crowded podcasting world. Well, today I get to talk to one of my very good friends. It seems like I have the greatest gig here. I get to talk to so many wonderful friends of mine, but you're really going to enjoy this particular interview. This is with Courtney Armstrong. Courtney is a licensed professional counselor who's presently residing in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Courtney is just a master therapist, particularly in the areas of grief and trauma. And she has a lot of really new, exciting information coming out soon that I think you guys are just going to really find immensely helpful in a new book she's writing. The works she already has out, I want to highly recommend. One is called Transforming Traumatic Grief, which is obviously a way to assist clients in moving past these events where they feel immobilized a lot of times. The other book I want to recommend that she wrote, I just love this book. It's called The Therapeutic AHA, 10 Strategies for Getting Your Clients Unstuck. So this is a book specifically for therapists who get stuck themselves and whose clients get stuck. And it's taking this experiential, what I'll call a resource-directed approach toward creating the conditions for change to occur in the therapy room, where you're not limited to having to follow some kind of treatment plan or theory too closely. Your goal is just to assist your clients in having a unique experience that causes very deep shifts in how they're thinking and feeling. Courtney got her master's in counseling education from the University of New Orleans, and she is a master level, at least I consider her master level, in the fields of hypnotherapy and rapid resolution therapy. She's just a delight to talk to, and every time that we speak or we work together, we do workshops together, I learn something. Hopefully she gets something out of our interactions, but it's a lot of fun. So without further ado, let's go to an interview with Courtney Armstrong. Courtney Armstrong, welcome to Potential Not Pathology.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to have you because for quite a while you have been interviewing me, and now I get to turn the tables on you.
Oh, gosh, that's kind of scary. So I'm on the hot seat now.
Yes, you are. Just like Fritz Perls put people on the hot seat.
Right.
Yeah. Well, for those who aren't familiar with your wonderful work, I'd like for you to just briefly just tell me what got you started in this field of psychotherapy.
Wow. Let's see. So I guess I got interested. I've always had some interest in psychology, and I had one of those personalities even as a kid. I wanted to help people, But then I went through my own stuff when I parents divorcing, and honestly, at the time, we just rolled with it. I was 6 years old, and people would ask me, "Wow, is that really hard having divorced parents?" And I would say, "No, we're fine," And it wasn't until I got older, actually in college, about 19, that I started having a lot of anxiety and depressive symptoms. Mm-hmm. And went to a therapist at my college, and it made such a huge difference in my life, Paul. I mean, and she helped me realize, even though, I wasn't beaten as a child or anything like that, she helped me realize some of the things that happened in my family dynamics as a result of the divorce and other losses that had kind of set me up for patterns that were leading to the anxiety and depressive symptoms I had. But it made such a big difference in my life, and I couldn't believe how much it helped, that I began to get more interested and wanted to do that myself. So I started volunteering first with the Georgia Council on Child Abuse, just to make sure, this was something I really wanted to do, because I was kind of scared, like, is this field going to be really depressing? And my father didn't think it was a good idea. He's a businessman, so he just wanted me to get a good old business degree. But as I got into it, I just found it really rewarding. And even though it can be a tough profession for sure, I really started out enjoying working with kids. And of course, I've told stories on a lot of podcasts about my work with kids in New Orleans, where I went to graduate school. And of course, those kids have been through a lot of trauma. Many of them were in gangs, or at least impacted by gang violence. And so, I pulled out their creativity and some things that helped them, and we might get into talking about that later. But some of the traditional things I was being taught in graduate school were not working for this population. Some of those traditional cognitive behavioral techniques, when you just saw a friend of yours get shot to death the day before, and some therapist, well-intentioned therapist, comes in and says, well, let's identify your negative thoughts, or your cognitive distortions. It's like, so I think where you and I have some common interest is getting back to the heart of how to help people heal. Right,
yeah. This early experience working with younger people, what did you get the most out of for your own personal practices today?
Well, I believe with kids, you have to get creative. That, especially at certain ages, they don't have that. Their prefrontal cortex isn't even well developed enough to try to reason through things. So a lot of what you have to do with kids is experiential work. So you have to create experiences that cause them to feel or think differently about things. So, for example, with the kids in New Orleans who were preteens and adolescents, we used a lot of art, music, dance movement, role play stuff, and it was really spontaneous. I found if I went in with this plan, okay, today we're going to talk about, how to feel hopeful in spite of all this horror that's around you. I couldn't go in there with some pre-planned. I could go in with some intention. Here's what I want to do for these kids. But really, I find it works best if you kind of have an intention for a session and then work off what the client brings to you. So, for instance, I would tell the kids, here's my intention for today. I want to help you feel more hopeful about your future, because last time because I was working in groups, you guys were telling me you felt like the world didn't work for you, that you couldn't get out of the projects, that your only options were to sell drugs or work at McDonald's. And so what I'd like to pull out today is, let's see if there's some other options that we could explore. For instance, one of the kids in the group was so talented artistically, and he would always draw athletic shoes. And I said, Nike needs people who can do the things that you're doing. I mean, they need shoe designers. You could go that direction. And what was so neat, that I realized working with those kids is nobody had ever explored those possibilities with them.
Right. Yeah. When you just said that about those, you're artistically talented and Nike shoes, the logos, and designing those kind of things. Have you found in your practice? I have found this in mine that we if we're programmed a certain way to kind of focus more on looking at what's wrong with the client or what's wrong with the situation, those golden moments of resources just slip by, and it's like we don't even notice them.
It's right. That's exactly right. And, my training in New Orleans, our program was training us. First, they give you the person-centered Carl Rogers training so that you knew how to develop rapport and relationships and listen effectively. But then shortly after, there was training in how to identify pathology and how to use, at that time, traditional cognitive behavioral techniques. I mean, we did get some training in Gestalt and some other things, but still it was pathology-focused. And I think you're right that we were missing some of these moments, like you said, to pull out what the client was bringing that was a beautiful resource or ability that could help them overcome whatever challenge the life was bringing them.
Yeah. Now, when you're working with people, whether they're young people or older people, do you find that being aware of not just their resources, but your resources, your emotional state, all of that is part of the therapy rather than a technique or a series of techniques or theories, that your own emotional state, your own behaviors, all of that is part of their therapy? Absolutely,
because the most healing occurs in the therapeutic relationship, And I mean, all kinds of research bears that out again and again, that it's more about the relationship than the technique that you use. But, what kind of therapeutic relationship? I think you have to be aware of what a client's evoking in you. And sometimes it's counter-transference stuff that you need to take care of when you're in therapy. But a lot of times, some clients pull out my humorous side and my playful side, and that's how we connect. And if I sat there and just did empathic listening and said, oh, yeah, and how does that feel? They would be bored and uncomfortable. And then some clients want my softer side. So I think we do have to be aware of what we're picking up on and what comes to us to how to respond to a client, because sometimes we're realizing, this is what this client needs from me to feel safe or to connect or to feel, motivated.
Right. Yeah. I've noticed, and this is just my opinion, that it seems in some ways the psychotherapy field has made so many leaps forward in some areas, particularly, in my opinion, again, in the field of like interpersonal neurobiology and all of those kind of things, the coming in and, blending with neuroscience and learning a lot about that. But as far as theories and techniques, it seems like we've kind of reversed direction, where there's more of a focus on the person's pathology, more focus on narrative, rather than experience. And I'm kind of wondering what your thoughts are. My thoughts are, I think everyone needs to go back to the field of true systemic therapy, where there was, it's an interactive process rather than a narrative process. What are your thoughts on the experiential parts of doing therapy?
Well, this is the heart of my message, and I think what you and I have in common. I believe people heal through experiences. The emotional part of our brain doesn't understand words, so it thinks like an animal, and we know that now from neuroscience, that we can now confirm that your subconscious mind is just your emotional brain, and that is the part of the brain that we share with animals. The small children operate mainly from that part of the brain. And the prefrontal cortex develops much later in life, and it's not fully developed till you're 25 years old. So when you try to use just talk therapy, it's not what you're saying that's healing. It's the tone of voice, the what you're communicating non-verbally that has more of an impact on the client. And that's really what the magic of hypnosis is. So what hypnosis is, I believe, is talking. It's how to talk to that part of the brain, and hypnosis is just creating an experience that helps the brain, that part of the brain, learn something new or alter a past pattern or alter a memory. We know we can do that now. And you don't have to just use hypnosis, but I've just mentioned it because I know that's something we share in common. But it's about creating, instead of thinking, okay, I see this client's negative thought pattern, how can I help them see that and get them to change it? It's more about, understanding, wow, this pattern must have been adaptive to this person at one time. Otherwise, the emotional brain won't keep it if it doesn't work in some way. Yeah, and it's trying to understand what was adaptive about this and exploring that with the client. I mean, you don't have to try to figure it out. Ask them. They'll tell you. And then say, well, how can we alter it now so that it works to your advantage? And then you and the client collaborate to create an experience. And that experience could be just through how you relate to each other, or through, I use music, I use play, I use humor, stories. Those are all things that emotional part of the brain will respond to.
Yeah. I don't really understand the focus on what we're seeing a lot is referred to, the evidence-based therapy, and I respect the research that's gone into that. But as you mentioned, if you really look holistically, it's the relationship that makes the difference. And I'm wondering if a lot of times the emphasis on regimentation and stick to this specific way of doing things is a way for therapists to feel like they have some degree of competence, because what you're kind of suggesting is jumping into the deep end of the pool, which is actually the best swimming is in there, but yet if somebody's not comfortable with swimming and they don't know what's going to happen, they might have to rely on these kind of theories and techniques. How do you help your not your clients, your students, your workshops? How do you help them kind of break out of that?
Well, I think people want a structure, and I mean, I've wanted a structure. So I think we get this false sense of security, like, okay, here's my structure, and if I just follow these steps, those are the steps to healing. So I think we get this false sense of security from that because, like you said, wading in those deep waters can feel kind of scary, and like we don't have a map. We don't know where we're going. So I do think to get a structure, but to be flexible. So the structure that I kind of work off of is first always understanding where the client's at, how they got there, their story, and how they conceive of the problem. But then the other piece is really understanding, well, where do you want to go with this? What do you want to happen instead? And that's what I don't think we have focused enough on in our training of therapists, to how to transition them from validating their feelings to leading them towards exploring, well, what do you want instead? And let's come up with some ways to get you there, how to feel that. And when I started working that way, and it made a huge difference, and my clients love it. It's an uplifting way of working, instead of just going deeper and deeper and exploring all the why does this happen and how did this happen? That would get them even more depressed. And so it's this art of pacing and leading. And I think the structure is, how to follow with the client and part of their relationship. Like when we work with trauma, initially people do want to feel heard and validated and understand why they're feeling what they're feeling. So we do pacing and some education. And then the next step is, so how do you want your story to change? You know, what do we want to do with this horrific event, and how do we help you pull out, you know, something that would flip it to your advantage, to give you more credibility, depth, wisdom, compassion. And when you can help them think about it that way, clients are often excited about that process.
Yeah, I agree. You know, you probably have heard this too. After, I would say the majority of sessions I have with clients with this kind of what I call a resource-directed approach is that the client will say, well, this isn't what I expected. This was a pleasant surprise.
Yes.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of those are folks who have already, you know, done therapy in the past.
Right.
And sticking to such a regimented tool. I remember a story about Frank Fairley, who created provocative therapy, and Frank was known to say or do anything, and he would tease the clients mercilessly and all these kind of things, and his mind was really sharp, and he was funny, and he's quick, and at the Q&A part of one of his trainings, someone says, well, Frank, we can't do it the way you do. You just do it so quickly. And then Frank looked at him and said, well, do it slower then. And it's funny, but it's kind of like you almost have to say, you know, if you need to do what you need to do, then that's what you need to do.
Right.
I mean, and so having too much regimentation, I agree with you. I want to. You mentioned about trauma. I know that's been a passion of yours for many years since I've known you. You've really been involved with finding new ways to help people heal from trauma. Could you talk a little bit about your approach to helping people in this like I say, this uplifting way? I know that you really want to, as I say, end on a high note when you work with people. Yeah. So could you kind of explain and explore that a little bit?
Yeah. So, let's see, where do I start? So when I worked with the kids in New Orleans, I was literally just flying by the seat of my pants, and I did not know what I was doing. I didn't know how to explain what I was doing except that I was being creative. Now I know what was effective is I was helping them to have hope and how to take what they had been through and turn it into something useful. And I'm going to use the word useful instead of positive.
Okay.
Because you can't always put a positive spin on some this awful stuff that people go through, but if you can say, let's figure out how to make this useful to you in some way. And so for an example, just a client that I was working with yesterday, she had a horrible experience in surgery. That she had a cervical fusion, and the surgery itself went okay, but the recovery experience, when she was in the recovery room, she's only supposed to be in there an hour. She was in there for 5 hours, left without being attended to. She started having, and she's in her 70s, so she started having tachycardia. She started having trouble catching her breath. She's a nurse, so she knew she was having a reaction to the anesthesia, and nobody would come to help her. So she literally thought, I am going to die. And she was urinating all over the bed. Nobody was coming to help her. She felt completely helpless. This was the hallmark of trauma. And of course, she's having post-traumatic stress symptoms from this experience. And so when we were working together recently, what I'm always thinking about is how to validate what they've been through, but how to help them, how to lead them towards something that would make it somehow something that they could live their life in a more meaningful way. Now, I will tell you, the first psychologist that she went to told her, there's really nothing we can do. It just takes time. It's just only time can heal these things. And she was like, I cannot sleep. I'm having these horrible nightmares. I'm having panic attacks. I cannot function. This is not me. I am a strong person. She has been through other traumatic experiences in her life, like, the loss of a grandchild. And she was, her house was burglarized and she was there and held at gunpoint. I mean, this woman's been through prior trauma and survived and didn't have PTSD. So what I have learned is, first, you help people understand the symptoms of trauma. That was really helpful to her, to help her say, well, here's what's happening while you're having these nightmares. You know, that emotional part of your brain is trying to make sense of it, and it still does not believe it's completely out of danger. So it's keeping you on guard. So one of the things we have to do is create an experience in this session that helps your mind believe it's okay now. So one way you can do that is just finish the story. So what we did is we went through her story and finished them. When did you finally get out of that recovery room? What happened to get you out of that situation? And it was that she finally got with it enough cognitively, as the anesthesia was kind of wearing off, to insist that somebody help her and get her husband, because they hadn't even brought her husband back. And he began to get worried around the same time. But he had to go all the way to the CEO to get help for her. And but once they got her up on the floor, she was able to recall vividly. Your emotional brain has to experience it. We can't just talk about it intellectually. Tell me what they did that made you feel cared for. And she vividly brought to mind a nurse that was so kind to her and gentle and supportive, and brought her, you know, a warm meal. And then when her husband brought her flowers. So when we had to get into those experiences where she felt safe again, and signals to the emotional brain, everything's going to be okay. And then the next part of the work was, is there a way we can help you create something meaningful out of this experience? Because the belief that set in after this was, I'm so scared to ever have a medical procedure again. How do I know this isn't going to happen again? And so we had to bring to mind some things that she now knows to do to make sure that doesn't happen again, like how to advocate on the front end, that if her husband hasn't heard from, you know, somebody within an hour of her getting into the recovery room, that it's time to start making some noise, you know. But also the cool thing was, she's actually bringing awareness to the hospital. I mean, she's not litigious. She doesn't want to file a lawsuit just to get some money, but she, as a nurse, is really concerned about a lot of missteps, and she's gotten her chart, and she sees where a lot of errors occurred. And so what I brought out in her, 'cause she's kind of feeling guilty for, you know, taking a legal route to fix some of these things. But I said, so what's going on here is your ethics as a nurse, I think, is driving this. Like, it's about your values, and you spent such a long career in nursing, and your care for the profession, and your desire to make sure this never happens to anybody again. And that's really what you're going for here. And we helped her clarify it in a way that she's more clear on her intention, and that she feels good about what she's doing. Like, you know, maybe it's, you know, I don't believe things happen for a reason, but maybe it's good this happened to me as a nurse, because someone without my background wouldn't know what to look for and how to help remedy this problem. So that's a long story, but an example of, as a therapist, we have to listen for their resources. We have to listen to their values and how to help them utilize that to turn this thing around, so that they feel like, I can turn this horrible situation into something that helps me bring more good into the world.
Yeah. And what I'm also hearing, too, is that your ear is always listening for, you know, client strengths and resources. And you know, one of our mentors, Bill O'Hanlon, talks about that there's always hypnosis going on in a session, but oftentimes it's the client hypnotizing the therapist into focusing on the worst thing possible, and missing those strengths. So how do you kind of train yourself, and what's your recommendation to therapists listening when they're dealing with someone who has trauma, to start listening for those strengths? That
is a great question, because, clients are good hypnotists, you know. So you don't want to make sure you're not the one getting hypnotized, because you get drawn into their story. and our empathy and our compassion and our intrigue with, oh my God, and we're trying to imagine what it would be like to have been in that situation so that we can empathize with them. But then sometimes we can end up feeling as helpless and terrorized as them. So to avoid that, what you have to do is be listening to what happened, but you have to stay clear in your mind. The story is really about this person went through this and is sitting across from me in this office totally alive and intact. That's amazing. So what I'm always thinking about is the resilience. I'm listening for the resilience. I'm listening to what happened. At the same time, I'm thinking, how the heck did they get through that? And I'm listening for in their story what they did. Like this client I was just telling you about, her belief and what would get her so upset is, I thought I was going to die because I knew I was starting to have a reaction to the opiates and the anesthesia that could have stopped my breathing. And I said, and what did you do? Like what I'm hearing here is somehow you've managed to focus on the clock and you were totally tuned in to everything that was going around you. Like when you're in a fight or flight response, your senses are more highly tuned because your brain's trying to monitor the environment to look for a way to escape or survive. And I said, how did you do that? What did you do to will yourself to stay that conscious and alert and in tune with what was going on? And she was like, well, let me think about that. So instead of feeling helpless, I'm flipping it around to, oh my gosh, in spite of that, you managed to do this. So tell me, I'm curious, how the heck did you do that? And then that uplifted her affect broadened. She sat up straighter. She felt more competent. And I've done that with rape victims. Like, what were you doing in that moment? Like, I know you felt like you dissociated, like you left your body, but what were you doing? Oh, I was just focusing on the door because I just knew as soon as this was over, I was going to find a way to get out of there. Right. Those things empower them.
And, trauma is such a, it's a buzzword now.
Yeah.
And it's a good buzzword because I think it's been there, but historically overlooked. I personally believe about 85% of issues are sometimes involving trauma.
Yep.
But it's so easy to be overwhelmed, as we said, but we can also apply that to our own lives because all of us, not just traumatic, but just any kind of life change, we always have resources that we overlook, and that's why I think it's wise that we find our own therapists who are resource focused and
right.
Help us out, and when we're hearing all these kind of things.
Right.
Now, I wanted to ask you about kind of continuing on this idea about trauma. Is building the experience. Now you talked about finding their strengths and things that they were doing, but when you're building an experience within the therapy room, everyone is different, obviously. But do you have a specific kind of way to create a positive, and it's that word positive, but useful?
Yes,
that's it. Useful experience.
That's a good question. Like in my book, The Therapeutic AHA, that book I talk about this concept align, lift, and lead. And what we were talking about, it's kind of an extension of that pacing and leading we were talking about earlier. But the first thing is alignment, because we know what's therapeutic in the relationship is feeling alignment with somebody, feeling like there's somebody. We know from psychological first aid after disasters and traumatic events, the first step of psychological first aid is to establish safety and a sense of social support and connection, stabilization. That's the most healing thing. And a good example of that would be a client of mine who was in the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting. And when she wasn't in the actual movie she wasn't in the actual showing where the shooting occurred. She was in the Batman showing next door. So they were just rushed out, and she didn't know why. And when she got out to the parking lot, it was just mayhem. And she and her sister almost tripped over someone who was bleeding in the parking lot that had been shot. And she felt so helpless. She didn't know what to do with this woman. And her sister went to go find help. And they didn't know if the shooting was still going on. They heard there's a shooting, but they didn't know if there's like a gang war going out in the parking lot or what. So they didn't know if they were in danger just being out there, but they couldn't leave this woman bleeding. And my client said, I didn't know what to do. All I thought to do, I just held her hand and asked her if I could call somebody for her. And she said, yeah, could you call my mom and let her know what's going on, that I'm here, but I'm alive, and we don't know what's going on yet, but I just need to hear her voice, And so the client did that, but when she came to me for treatment, she was still she was very traumatized from this event and worried that this person may have died. She didn't know what happened to her. All she knew is I held her hand till the EMTs could get to her. And I said, but you know what? I said, you did exactly what you were supposed to do, which the first step of psychological first aid is to help someone feel safe, someone else is there, and help them make connection with a loved one if possible. And that's exactly what you did. That is actually more preventative of PTSD than debriefing over the event. That's the first step. You want to get that first. And so to make a long story short, later my client, one of the things we did to help her reprocess the trauma was I held her hand as she told me that story. And she thought, wow, that really was helpful for you to just be present with me and hold my hand and not pity me, but to just go, I'm right here. You're doing great. I'm so glad you got through that. How did you do that? Just have genuine curiosity. And then later she went to a hearing. A lot of the, people involved in that event were at a hearing for the shooter, and she saw the woman that she had supported, and the lady was so happy to see her. She goes, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here because I need to thank you. That was amazing what you did for me. And my client asked her, have you been struggling with PTSD? Because I sure have. And she goes, you know what? I actually haven't. She said, I have had some nightmares, but she said, I don't think about so much the shooting that day. And sometimes I get emotional, and I say this because it's so beautiful. She said, what I think about is the kindness of a stranger who held my hand during all that horror. That's what stands out for me.
Yeah, the holding of the hand.
Yeah.
If I think back to graduate school, and I think about don't ever touch your client unless it's to shake hands on the beginning and the end, and that resource that lady needed for you to hold her hand, and so you really have to be intuitive.
Yes.
I'm guessing.
Yeah, because not every client's going to want you to hold their hand, and of course I'll say, I don't know why, but I'm getting the sense that it could be helpful if I held your hand. Would that make sense to you? And they'll tell you that seems like that might help, or they'll say, nah, I don't really want you to touch me. They'll tell you. But if you're feeling that, a lot of times there's that right brain to right brain communication, that nonverbal interaction that's going on with you and the client. So sometimes those intuitive inclinations that you're getting are because on some level you and the client are having that nonverbal exchange, and you're intuiting what they're wanting or what would help. But always check it out, because it could be your countertransference. So I always ask first, I'm getting this sense, is that accurate for you, or is that just me?
Yeah.
So
and it's tough to know sometimes, and I think that's also experience.
It is. It is. And then, so I think that's part of that relationship experience, just aligning with them and being present. And then the next piece is I call it lift. I find some resource, like you talk about, to lift the client, to help them feel more competent, empowered, or capable. Because when they come to us, they're feeling pretty beat down usually. I'm a mess. I don't know how to manage my life. This is out of control. So it could just be as simple as, like with this client, you know, when she's like, I'm a mess, I can't stop these nightmares, I'm supposed to finish graduate school and I'm flunking out because I can't concentrate, and all the stuff I've worked for is getting unraveled by this, you know, PTSD. But, you know, I found something to lift her. I'm like, wow, it sounds to me like you actually did something that was pretty helpful for that lady, you know, or I'm so glad you're here. This is, you know, this is something that is difficult for some people to put together by themselves, and it can be very helpful to work through this with somebody, like something to help them feel competent and supported. And then we talk about, where do you want to go from here? How do you want to be feeling instead? How can we turn this to your advantage? Mm-hmm. And for this client, what it ended up being for her, after we got through the reprocessing the memory with me holding her hand and then her having feedback from the woman, yes, that's what, you actually helped me avoid PTSD. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. That was really big for my client. Yeah. And then the next step was this client was going into the healthcare field. So I'm like, well, this was an awful experience, but what did you get out of this that could help you be an even more effective healthcare provider? And, you know, that was the next step for her, how to use this to her advantage. And I always affirm, I don't believe things happen for a reason, so I'm not suggesting that. And I'm not suggesting that you had to go through this to get this experience. Like, this is not the way we wanted you to gain more compassion and wisdom. But now you got it. So how are you going to use it?
Right. Yeah. And, you know, at the same time, it's I'm sure that if the client had the value system that everything does happen for a reason, you would probably utilize that.
Yeah, as well. If that's helpful to them. If it's right. If that is a useful way of thinking about it, then I'll just go along with it. You're right.
Yeah. So when you think about, you know, the many years that you've kind of come to some of the insights, I know that you are daily still refining and learning.
Yes.
I believe it's lifelong process. Yeah. At this stage, do you find that you enjoy your work much more than, let's say, 10 years ago?
I do. Now, I will tell you, there was a period in there, I think, after I'd been a therapist for maybe about 7 to 8 years, I was burning out because I was still on that pathology even though I knew from working with the kids, experiential approaches to helping them find their strengths, their resources, creative ways to turn things around in their life. Even though I knew that worked, when I got to working with adults, I thought, well, I can't pull that stuff off. You know, we can't like, you know, one of the things that I did with the kids is we'd make, at that time it was mixtapes because it was cassette tapes, but we'd make playlists basically. Let's make a playlist that helps you get in touch with that feeling of being motivated even when you're feeling discouraged, or how to help calm you down. Well, I was reluctant to do that with adults, but so I was still thinking, I got to do this evidence-based cognitive therapy, you know, and when I was burning out, I sought, you know, more training from people who were more focused on positive psychology, like Bill O'Hanlon and John Connolly and some others. And I began to realize, it's about creating an experience in the session that can uplift them or inspire them, but without being too Pollyanna about it, you know. And when I started exploring that with people and experimenting, I got reinvigorated, and now I enjoy my work so much more because I love exploring with the client and collaborating with them what's going to work, you know, what experience is going to do it for this client. And I'm pretty transparent about that. I mean, I tell clients what I'm up to because they will help you, and they're going to come up with the winning ticket, so to speak. You're going to just plan a suggestion, but they're going to come up with, you know what, this would do it for me. Like one of my clients, actually, for him, all the guided imagery and stuff that I did wasn't really resonating with him. He's a very rational guy, but actually, we started some mindfulness practices with him, and he has had horrible things. He's lost a child, an adult son. The other two children have struggled with substance abuse issues. One, we're pretty sure, is schizoaffective disorder, and he's dealt with so many different challenges that have been so heartbreaking that he couldn't put a positive spin on anything or find anything useful. I mean, that concept was just like, Courtney, forget about it. I'm never going to get down with that. But but when we just got to thinking about it from a mindfulness standpoint, like, you know what? Things are just random. Life happens. There's ups and downs. Life's never constant. It's ever changing. Even my sad mood today even changes. Like, so when he just began to get into the impermanence of life and latch onto that concept, that really worked for him, and he ran with it. Now he's like teaching me Buddhist concepts that I wasn't aware of, that I'm like, oh wow, this is fascinating. But so I think you have to really just let the client know, here's what helps people heal, and let's together explore what makes the most sense for you. But for him, we had to start with an experience, like just meditation experiences and walking meditation. That's what helped him start to get a little more intrigued with that bigger concept.
Yeah, and all of the interactions that you have with people from the get-go, do you kind of observe them where they're at? Do you get a feeling about that, or is it just a combination of all of it?
I think I listen and look for. A lot of it's trial and error sometimes, but if I hear them speak in a lot of visual metaphors, for example, like I see this, I envision this, I imagine that, if I hear them speaking, then I think, oh, they're pretty visual. I think they're a visual processor, and I think, well, they would probably like imagery and metaphorical stories. So I'll ask them, I'll say, you want to try some guided imagery? And I find clients who've been through trauma, especially like physical and sexual trauma, can be really good at imagery because they use that to escape and dissociate. And they like that better than mindfulness, because sometimes for them, when their mind gets still, they have flashbacks of the abuse, so they do better focusing on something concrete, like an image that they're in control of. Or a mantra, then some clients, this comes from our neurolinguistic programming training, Paul. Some people you can tell are more auditory. They use a lot of sound words. I hear this, it sounds like, I tune into. So I start to think, oh, they're probably more receptive to either music or things that we can create with sound, or sometimes they're really good with quiet, like how to create more quiet and sense of peace in their life. So if we were doing imagery, for example, with the ocean, I would be saying, just imagine the sound of the waves and the rhythm. That would be more moving to them than imagining what it looked like. And then if I notice people are real animated in their body language, or they use a lot of movement words, then I know this person is probably going to be better with movement experiences. So how can we stand up and do some movement in the session that will help them feel more empowered? And I always check it out with them. Like, you seem like someone who might, instead of imagery, maybe we just need to do some gentle movement here to help you relax or discharge this agitation or anxiety or feel more empowered. You want to try that out? And they'll go, yeah, let's try it out. Or, I've never thought about that. And so I think you can listen and kind of sense from observing the client what modalities they might be responsive to. And then the other piece is just listening to what their desire is, their values are, and pulling more of that out to the surface.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something that, unfortunately, I think a lot of other therapists gloss over is the values, the identity that they have, that their highest value are their children. I often wonder why in a session we're not talking about children then. It should be like 50% or more of the children. If their highest value is creating a business, why are we not talking about business plans?
Right.
But it says, well, my lowest value is feeling like shit. And so let's talk about that for 45 minutes. And then at the end, we'll just say, okay, I'll see you next week.
Right.
I don't know if that's
right.
Going anywhere.
Well, it's true. That's a great point, because I also look for what topics excite clients, like where they get really animated, because then that's where I know I got to find something more compelling than their pain to get them moving in therapy. So another example I talk about in my book is a client, one of those adolescent, well, he's actually in his early 20s, but kind of got that adolescent, I don't know, his parents wanted him to come, and he had flunked out of college twice, and he was depressed, and he said, I'm coming because I know I need some help. It's not just because my parents want me to be here. But I said, well, what would you like to get out of the session? I don't know. Well, maybe college isn't for you. What do you think you want to do? What kinds of things interest you? I don't really know. And he really didn't know. So, but what I noticed when we were just having just a random conversation, which you can go off on tangents. That's allowed in therapy. I didn't know that, though. For a while, I thought, we're not doing real work. How am I going to document this? And the managed care wants to know that I'm constantly working on goals. Well, so how do I justify us talking about, rap music for 15 minutes? But what I noticed with this client is he said, well, that's the only thing that gives me any kind of satisfaction is I'm growing some tomato plants. And I'm really fascinated by all the different kinds of tomatoes and how to make them. And did you know if you pinched off the initial blooms that you get bigger tomatoes? And I said, tell me about this, because I don't know. I haven't been, And then he showed me pictures, and he's getting all excited. We spent a whole session just talking about tomatoes and him telling me how to grow tomatoes. And again, me just being fascinated and curious made him feel really competent. He knew something I didn't know, and he felt, maybe I'm not such a loser. And then eventually what that led to is what we began to eventually explore is, well, maybe you would be interested in doing some kind of organic farming. And he goes, I am really interested in that. And anyway, he went to a program. He finished an associate's degree initially, and now he's working for this really cool co-op that we have here in Chattanooga. And it's not full time yet. So he's not able to leave his parents' house just yet, but he is so happy. He's completely out of the depression. He knows what he wants to do with his life. And he's matured so much just by latching on to this and cultivating this interest. And if I hadn't known to be listening and looking for what excites him, what engages him, we never would have gotten there.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So here's a question. How do you nurture what excites you? What excites you to, be creative? What's kind of your personal regimen, if there is one?
Well, that is a great question. I think one is putting myself around creative people. So a lot of my friends I have a lot of therapist friends, but I also have friends that are just, artists or musicians or just, they're kind of silly. Like, I have playful friends, that we just like to goof off. And I do watch a lot of comedy and I love reading David Sedaris, and I've actually recommended that to clients instead of self-help books, and they have loved it because he talks about his dysfunctional family, but he's so funny about it. And so I think even though I read a lot of therapy books, and I know I have to break it up with some fiction and watching movies, and the arts really do talk about or exemplify how people deal with the troubled things in life. You know, a lot of art is depicting how people overcame things, or just music a lot of times is talking about how to pull meaning out of horrific events. So I think the arts really inspire me and help me think more existentially sometimes about, wow, that's a wonderful concept. I might, think about that with a client, like how we can take that idea and run with it, or maybe it will inspire them to think about how to turn something around in their life. So right. I think we have to nurture ourselves with things that are just enjoyable. I mean, the other thing is playing with my dog and getting out in nature is really important to me too. Yeah.
Well, I know that lately you've been doing an awful lot of trainings all over the country and actually out of the country. And what kind of trainings at this point in time? And this is we're recording this in 2016. But what trainings are you kind of focusing on lately?
Well,
in your teaching.
Well, one of the trainings that's really gathered a lot of interest, like I did the Therapeutic AHA book, and what that book does is it talks about this concept of creating an experience in the session, and it gives you the neuroscience of why that seems to work and how it impacts the brain and helps it heal. And then there's lots of ideas from imagery to movement to music to stories, humor, play, how you can create these experiences in the session. I give you lots of ideas. So when I was doing some workshops where you could experience that live, and we could do those things and help inspire therapists to come up with their own creative ideas. And what grew out of that, though, Paul, is a lot of people have come back to me now and said, well, I really want to go deeper in this concept about how to use it to work with trauma. And the other thing people have really been interested in is hypnosis. You say that you got a lot of these ideas from your hypnosis training. Can you train me in hypnosis? So the upcoming trainings I have are going to be, I'm going to be in South Carolina actually at the Scalp C conference and on June 11th, and that that day-long workshop is going to be the Therapeutic AHA, where we do a lot of the experiential stuff. And then this fall, I'm going to be doing some trainings for PESI on, I call it the new rules for treating trauma. And what I'm doing is bringing together all of the things most trauma therapies that are effective have in common, from EMDR to even exposure therapies, but what we know now really works and how to create those experiences, that you don't have to get these long certifications, to be able to treat trauma effectively. And that's what I want to teach people. And then you and I are talking about doing healing trauma with hypnosis. So I think what I'm putting together now are I've been invited to write another book about healing trauma in this way, and then developing what I call trauma-informed hypnotherapy.
Wonderful. So, you're staying so busy.
I am. It's just crazy, but I get so excited, and I'm so happy to connect with other therapists, and I so benefit from people like you and people that come to my trainings. We all need to help each other out and learn from each other. So
I agree. And I also want to point out that you also do consulting for therapists who maybe get stuck, and they can connect with you, and you can do some brief or long-term consulting.
Yes.
And I encourage people to do that. You remember that, was it Virginia Slim cigarettes that said, "You come a long way, baby"?
Yeah.
Well, baby, you come a long way. I can remember the first time we talked, and both of us were doing not a whole lot of nothing. I think you're a little ahead of me, but, well, you come a long way.
You have, too. My gosh, you've got 2 wonderful books out and now a podcast. And so it's exciting. And to all of you listening, thank you so much. Paul and I both thrive from getting your feedback and questions and stuff too, because I really like this idea of creating community.
Yeah. Well, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, I have one website that's more focused on therapists and training, and that's www.courtneyarmstrong.net. Mm-hmm. And then my private practice website, my practice is in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and that website's CourtneyArmstrongLPC.com. And, I need to blog more, but I get so busy with other things. But I try to put useful articles and videos and podcasts on both of those sites so that, and I have some free reports and worksheets that you can use in your sessions and that you can download. Just so I try to put resources out there for therapists and welcome everybody's feedback.
Yeah, well, great. Well, listen, I really appreciate you, as always, talking with me because I know how busy you have been. And I always tell folks the greatest gift we can give someone is our time and our attention. And I appreciate your gift. And I'm really excited about a lot of the things that you've got going on, and I encourage anyone who's listening to, and I'm not just saying this because Courtney's a friend of mine, but I mean really the work you're doing is so important, and I encourage anyone to look you up. So thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Paul. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and I appreciate what you're doing in the world too.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Potential Not Pathology with Dr. Paul J. Leslie. If you enjoyed the show, check out our website at potentialnotpathology.com, where you will find programs and articles showcasing unique and creative therapeutic applications.